Hey everybody, Thrash Till Death here. I'm going to be talking today about the new album Fear of Infinity by American doom metal band While Heaven Wept. I don't actually have the CD to hand at the moment, I've actually lent it to my sister. Anyway, I only actually discovered While Heaven Wept a few months ago when I heard a couple of tracks from their previous album Vast Oceans Lachrymose, and absolutely blown away by those. Vessel in particular, absolutely wonderful melodies on that track. And since then, Fear of Infinity, the band's debut album for Nuclear Blast Records, has become one of my sort of most anticipated albums of 2011. And since I just got it a few days ago, yeah, I'd have to say, even though it's not quite the masterpiece I dared to hope it was, it is really a fantastic effort all in all. While Heaven Wept, they've been around for quite a while now, a good 20 years or so. I think they debuted back in 1991, I'd have to check metalarchives.com. And they do have kind of a mixture of sounds going on. A particular reason I like them is that they have the sort of, they're very definitely descended from sort of the Black Sabbath tradition of heavy metal, very sort of riff-oriented. Without any of the sort of gimmickry you see in folk or symphonic metal in Doom these days. But at the same time, they're difficult to sort of pigeonhole into any one particular genre. Some of their earlier albums have been referred to as Candlemass worship, and that may be true. I guess that's sort of something you have to decide for yourself. And while Candlemass are very definitely sort of a reference point for them, there's definitely more to them than that, because as much as they might be classified as a doom metal band, there's also sort of elements, I think, there of early US power metal. One band, as a comparison point, that didn't occur to me for some reason when I first heard them, but just it actually came to me when I saw it on iTunes or Amazon or one of these other sites that does these sort of, if you like this artist, you might like one by this artist, those sort of things. Anyway, Manila Road. And when I saw that, it was just so blisteringly obvious. Yeah, of course, they have that much the same sort of mythic, epic, grandiose sort of storytelling, myth-making sort of sound to their riffs. I think both Manila Road and While Heaven Wept have a certain sort of, while their riffs are dramatic and kind of emotionally charged, they also have a very great sort of mythic quality to it, sort of cerebral, sort of intellectual, sort of feel like they're reaching across time almost, sort of establishing sort of narrative arc across history. That really doesn't make any sense when I say it like that, but it's something you do sort of come to understand when you listen to the album, particularly with the lyrics in tandem. And yeah, I do think While Heaven Wept have that sort of mythic quality to their riffs. That's a word I keep mentioning, but it's something that only a few bands have ever achieved properly, I think. Sabbath had it, Bathory had it during their Viking period, a handful of others, and While Heaven Wept, in their best moments, have it as well. I think probably my favourite song from the album would be Saturn and Sacrifice, because, well, it has a couple of sort of shifts in the sort of time of the song, and definitely it's a couple of major paradigm shifts when it comes to the riffs. And they can just really crank out quality riffs when they see fit. They have a very sort of chunky sound to them, but at the same time, it's not sort of dry or alienating. It's very sort of melodic, very sort of, not exactly mellow, but because it is quite a heavy band when all is said and done. I think probably the best word for it would be lush, and I think a large part of that is because of the voice of Rain Irving. I've mentioned him in the past when I was talking about their song Obsessions Now Effigies, also an excellent track on this album. But yeah, Rain Irving, I think, really adds an extra dimension to this band's sound overall. I think he's a recent addition. He only came into the band during Vast Oceans Lachrymose. But yeah, he definitely sort of takes the band up a level, I think. He's not like a lot of other sort of power metal singers. He does definitely go for clear, sustained notes, but it's fairly obvious that his main aim isn't to sort of shatter as many octaves as he can. He has a very sort of, I don't know how to describe it exactly, very emotionally charged voice. but at the same time, also sort of a storytelling quality to it. He's sort of, I guess, probably the closest thing he reminds me of would be Messiah Marcolin from Candlemass, back when he was with Candlemass, but in a similar way, but not the same by any means. Messiah Marcolin always had quite a mournful, sorrowful quality to his vocals, and I think Rain Irving always has more of a sort of note of, not exactly joy, but certainly optimism to his vocals. He often sort of layers his vocals as well, and that helps add to the sort of lush sound that I've been talking about. As I say, the album isn't quite the masterpiece I dared to let myself hope it would be. I think probably my biggest complaint with it, although before I get to that, I'd like to mention one thing. Although I do respect Rain Irving greatly for his vocals, there is one sort of thing that irked me over the course of the album vaguely. Probably the most obvious one would be on the song Unplentitude, where it becomes very obvious he doesn't always accentuate his consonants as much as he should have. And on Unplentitude, he always, it requires him to sort of drag out the name of the song, Unplentitude, as a vocal line repeatedly and quite prominently over the course of the song. And so for some reason he pronounces it he pronounces it as Unplenitude. I was like, what? No, dude, you can't do that. It's unplentitude. There is a T in the middle of your own made-up word. You have to sort of accentuate it. I don't know if this seems like a really minor nitpick, but it is something that bothered me. I'm not sure why. But I always think if singers are going to go for very sort of clear, sustained notes, they really need to sort of accentuate every syllable quite clearly and sharply. Otherwise, it just sounds like they're mumbling. But yeah, my biggest complaint with this album would probably be its running time. It's only 37 minutes long, which is short pretty much by anyone's standards. And 37 minutes can be a decent length for an album. I mean, if I was listening to Origin or Morbid Angel or somebody like that, I mean, 37 minutes is plenty for music like that, but While Heaven Wept, this sort of music can be sustained over much greater running times. I could quite happily listen to songs like Finality or Obsessions Now Effigies for 60, 70 minutes at a time. It's not particularly difficult listening, and it's not, you can sort of relax and get into it, so it's not something that sort of exhausts you. Especially when you consider there are other doom metal bands out there like Esoteric and Reverend Bizarre, who are doing double albums pushing 2 hours long. So it does seem like While Heaven Wept could make more of an effort to put out slightly longer albums, especially considering they so often have to have such long gaps in between their studio albums. Not in this case, it's only been 2 years since Vast Ocean's Lachrymose, but still, it seems like there's room here for more material, you know? That said, a couple of the tracks are slightly weaker than the others. Unplentitude, as I said before, is a slightly weak sort of ballad at the centre of the album that doesn't really go anywhere. To Grieve Forever also feels a little bit unstructured, but pretty much all the other songs, Obsessions Now Effigies, Destroyer of Solace, Finality, Saturn and Sacrifice, Hour of Reprisal I think is the first track, all of those are absolutely solidly written as you could possibly ask for, all based on very sort of simple but extraordinarily effective progressions of riffs that just follow on logically one step to the next and just absolutely make sense, sound completely original and innovative, and honestly it seems to me like this is the sort of direction metal should be going in, away from the sort of over-processing of and the sort of cliches of modern power metal and death metal, and sort of getting back the sort of organic, more sort of wholesome vibe from the 70s and 80s, but at the same time not really going full-on retro, just sort of learning our lessons from those older bands, but also applying it to sort of more modern songwriting, if that makes any sense. But yeah, While Heaven Wept, Fear of Infinity, while not quite as good as I would have liked it, it's still probably one of the best albums of the year, and if you're into doom metal or power metal at all, you definitely owe it to yourself to go out and check this one out. So While Heaven Wept, Fear of Infinity, absolutely gets my recommendation, and if you pretty much any metal fan should give this one a try. So until next time, I'm Thrash Till Death, and my next album review will hopefully be of Hell's album Human Remains, an album 30 years in the making. So until then, I'll see you next time. Thrash Till Death. Goodbye.